It was a Tuesday in February, one of those unforgiving Midwest mornings where the cold stings like betrayal. I was parked behind the student rec center where the Wi-Fi stretched far enough for me to download my lecture slides. I cracked the windows slightly to keep from suffocating myself with my own breath and microwaved burrito steam. The only reason I survived those nights was routine. Wake up at 5 a.m. Use the gym showers before rush hour. Microwave breakfast at the gas station. Attend lectures. Deliver food between classes. Study. Night shift. Sleep in the car. Repeat. No one knew, not really. My classmates thought I lived off campus. My professors probably assumed I was lazy. My family? They hadn't called in months. The last time I visited Aunt Madison's house, Mason got a new gaming PC and rolled his eyes when I mentioned needing to borrow Wi-Fi to submit an assignment. The breaking point came not from my suffering, but from being seen. That afternoon, I was folding napkins behind the deli counter when I heard someone call my name. I looked up to see Avery Taylor, my uncle. Wealthy, polished, always in some kind of Patagonia vest over a crisp button-down. He blinked like he'd seen a ghost. "Caleb," he said. I smiled automatically. "Hey, Uncle Avery." He looked around as if someone might snap a picture. "What are you doing here?" I motioned to the apron and hairnet. "Working. Deli shift." His face twisted in discomfort. "But I thought you were in school full-time." "I am. This is my second job." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he walked away. I didn't expect a call or a text, but what I got that night shook me. At 2:17 a.m., as I tried to fall asleep in the freezing car after my second shift, a text popped up. "You're living in your car? Why didn't you say anything?" It was Avery. I hesitated for a moment before typing. Didn't think anyone would care. The typing bubble flickered. Then another message. "I care." 3 words. That was it. The next day, things moved faster than I could process. Avery called me during my food delivery shift. He wanted to meet. "Just to talk," he said. I agreed, figuring maybe he had a job lead or something I could latch onto. We met at a diner off Route 66. He ordered coffee, black. I got tap water. "I had no idea," he said. "Why didn't your dad tell me?" I shrugged. Probably didn't want to be embarrassed. I haven't heard from him in 6 months. Avery shook his head, and for a moment I thought he might cry. "You shouldn't have to live like this." Then came the offer. "I've got a pool house behind the main place. It's heated, has Wi-Fi, its own entrance. It's not much, but if you want, it's yours." I blinked. "What's the catch?" "No catch," he said. "Just get through school. You've already done more with less than anyone else I know." It sounded too good to be true. Because it was. I moved into the pool house on a Sunday morning, right as the sun cut through a layer of frost coating the yard like powdered glass. The space was nicer than I expected. Vaulted ceilings, a twin bed, a little kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, and a mini fridge. A small desk faced a window that looked out at the main house, where Avery lived with his wife and Mason. It was technically a guest house, but this was the first time someone would live in it long term. Avery handed me a key on a ceramic bottle opener shaped like a lighthouse. "We figured this would be less awkward than the garage remote," he joked. I gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Thanks again for this." He clapped me on the shoulder. "You earned it, Caleb. Just focus on school. That's all I ask." It felt like a lifeline, but it also felt like surveillance. I quickly learned to tiptoe around the household hierarchy. Mason didn't speak to me the first 2 weeks. The only time I caught his eye was when I passed him in the driveway. He nodded like he was acknowledging the mailman. Madison, on the other hand, was less subtle. The first time we crossed paths was in the kitchen of the main house. I was returning a borrowed mug from the guest house. She looked up from her phone and said, "Oh, you startled me. I didn't realize you had access to the house." I froze, mug in hand. "Just dropping this off." She nodded curtly. "Right." I left the mug in the sink and didn't enter the house again. Meanwhile, I kept grinding. Between the guest house Wi-Fi and my class schedule, I was able to drop one of my jobs. I picked up freelance design gigs on the side, slowly rebuilding savings. At night, I'd journal everything. The way Avery looked at me like he was trying to prove something, the way Madison's voice got thinner when I entered a room, and the way Mason's silence said more than his words ever could. The tipping point came during a family dinner I was invited to attend. It was a Saturday evening, and Avery insisted I join them for barbecue. I reluctantly agreed. It felt rude to decline after everything. Madison made ribs. Mason scrolled on his phone. Avery tried to create conversation. "So Caleb," he asked, "what's your plan after graduation?" "I'm applying to UX internships," I replied. "I've got a few leads already." Mason scoffed. "Guess that guest house really turned your life around, huh?" I blinked. "Excuse me." He didn't even look up. "Just saying, it's funny how fast things change when you finally get help. Some of us had to earn our way the old-fashioned way." My jaw tensed. "You mean the scholarship you didn't need? Or the car you got when you turned 16? Avery cleared his throat. "Boys." But I was already standing. "Thanks for dinner." Back in the guest house, I paced. It wasn't about the ribs or the sarcasm. It was the implication, like my survival up until now had been an inconvenience they were tired of pretending to admire. That night, I opened a Google Doc titled Receipts. I listed every job I held since 16, every rent payment, even when it was just gas money to keep the Civic heated, every credit hour I paid for without loans. I wasn't building a list out of bitterness. I was building a record, proof that I'd always been enough on my own. Later that week, I got an email from a scholarship committee I'd applied to months ago. They were intrigued by my story and asked for further documentation of hardship and perseverance. So I sent them the Google Doc. I never wanted pity, but I also wasn't going to let Mason, or anyone, rewrite the truth of what I had endured to get here. By the third week in Avery's guest house, the novelty had worn off. I had started to wake each morning with this creeping unease, a feeling like I was squatting in someone else's curated life. The space was technically mine for now, but everything I did felt watched, measured, like some informal contest I hadn't agreed to enter. The walls were thin. At night, I'd sometimes hear Mason's voice through the patio doors when he was on the phone. Laughing, confident, smug. "Yeah, Caleb's still here. Basically moved in. It's like a community service project or something," I heard once. I turned the music up after that. Madison's signals grew colder, too. She never confronted me directly, but she didn't have to. I could feel it in the subtle reorganization of shared spaces. Items I left in the main house's laundry room mysteriously relocated, passive-aggressive stickies on the fridge, "Please ask before taking anything, THX." And, most tellingly, the way she avoided eye contact entirely, like acknowledging me would make the situation real. The only thing that remained steady was Avery. He checked in once a week with texts or short walks over to the guest house patio. Always casual, always upbeat. "You settling in okay?" he'd ask, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Yeah, thank you again," I'd answer. And I meant it. I really did. But gratitude didn't erase tension. It just buried it deeper. Meanwhile, I kept journaling and refining my documentation. The Google Doc now spanned 30 pages, an evolving manifesto of survival. I wasn't just building a scholarship packet. I was writing my own damn biography. Every all-nighter, every eviction notice dodged, every insult passed off as tough love. Midway through that third week, I received an email from the Layton Foundation, one of the scholarships I had applied for months ago. "Your story reflects extraordinary resilience. We would like to schedule an interview for the next round of our hardship-based award process." I sat back in the desk chair, staring at the screen. The guest house suddenly felt less like a cage and more like a waiting room. Temporary, transitional. I wasn't stuck. I was staging something. Still, part of me couldn't shake the growing tension with Mason. One afternoon, I came back from class to find him parked in front of the guest house, leaned up against his Jeep like he was waiting for me. "You know this was supposed to be for guests, right?" he said, arms crossed. I walked past him. "Yeah, your dad's guest." "Funny. Just don't get too comfortable. This isn't charity. It's a favor. There's a difference." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He wanted a reaction, and silence was the only power I had that didn't come with a price tag. That night, I started looking at off-campus listings. Not because I had a place to go, but because I needed to believe I could leave if I had to. I reached out to a student housing board. I even texted Kyle, a classmate who once offered me a room for cheap. It wasn't a real plan yet, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't boxed in. I also created a spreadsheet, exit budget, rent estimates, deposits, utilities, gas. Everything I'd need if this guest house gig turned toxic. I labeled one tab Escape Hatch. Therapy was still out of reach financially, but I found a support group for students from dysfunctional homes that met bi-weekly on campus. I attended one session and left feeling a weird blend of relief and fury. It wasn't just me. There were others. We weren't broken. We were just bruised in the same places. Back at the guest house, I began building rituals. I'd make tea instead of scrolling. I journaled each night, not just what happened, but how I felt. Not to diagnose, just to notice. Naming the pain made it smaller. The final straw of the week came via group text. Madison sent out a message to family, household, that said, "Hi all, reminder that the guest house is a shared space, and overnight guests are not allowed without permission. Let's respect the house rules, please." I hadn't had a single guest. The message wasn't for all. It was for me. I didn't respond. But I started drafting a message of my own. One I wasn't sure I'd ever send, but one I needed to have ready if I did. The guest house had become less of a sanctuary and more of a proving ground. I still woke up at 5:45 a.m. every day, partly because my internal clock hadn't yet adjusted to sleeping indoors again, but mostly because I never wanted to risk bumping into Mason or Madison unprepared. Breakfast was an eggshell walk. Avery remained his charismatic, oddly distant self, popping into the kitchen to ask if I needed anything while rarely waiting for an answer. He meant well, I think, but even generosity can have sharp corners. Madison's hostility had evolved from passive-aggressive comments to icy silence. She'd stopped pretending altogether. One evening, she accidentally threw out a grocery bag I'd labeled with my name. When I retrieved it from the trash and put it back in the fridge, it disappeared again the next day. I said nothing. Instead, I noted it down in the journal I now carried everywhere, even to my part-time tutoring job on campus. Mason, on the other hand, played the long game. He'd swing by the guest house uninvited, pretending to be checking on things. I could tell he was scanning the room, probably for evidence I was enjoying anything he considered his. Once, he glanced at the modest laptop I kept on the desk and asked if it was one of those charity donations the school hands out. When I said it was the same beat-up machine I'd worked on in the back of my car, he smirked. I kept my responses polite. Bare minimum. Neutral. My rule was clear. No fuel for their fire. With the scholarship interview a week away, I buried myself in preparation. The university's financial aid office had nominated me for a housing-inclusive merit grant, a lifeline that could help me move into subsidized student apartments. It wasn't perfect, but it would be mine. My space. My lock. My silence. I'd already looked at off-campus listings and run the math twice. If I picked up weekend shifts again and maybe dropped one class, I could swing it. Freedom often came at the cost of comfort, but I was no stranger to that transaction. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where Madison insisted on praying for humility in young men who forget where they come from, I returned to the guest house and started boxing my things. I wasn't leaving yet. Not officially, but I wanted to be ready. The next day, Mason cornered me outside the main house. He leaned in with that condescending smile he'd perfected since childhood and asked, "So what's your angle, really? You think being poor makes you noble or something?" I said nothing. I just stared at him until he stepped back. That was the moment I realized I'd stopped asking for space. I was claiming it. And as I printed out my scholarship essay, my entire college and housing journey compacted into 500 words, I could feel a shift in my spine. Not arrogance. Not even anger. Just clarity. I wasn't part of their charity project. I was someone they could neither control nor diminish. The day of the scholarship interview arrived wrapped in gray skies and that metallic tension the air gets before a summer storm. I woke up early, earlier than usual, even, and made coffee in silence. The only light in the guest house came from my laptop screen, open to a folder labeled Proof of Worth. Inside were copies of my pay stubs, class transcripts, recommendation letters, and the photos I'd taken of my sleeping setup in the car, when that had been my only home. I hadn't originally planned to include those images, but something told me the panel needed to see more than numbers. They needed to see what struggle looked like when it didn't break you. The interview was virtual, thank God. I set up at the small desk near the window, angling the camera so that the rest of the guest house didn't show. I wore my only blazer, a thrift store find from 2 semesters ago. It was tight in the shoulders but clean. Professional enough. The conversation was brief, but intense. The panel asked thoughtful questions about resilience, sacrifice, vision. One woman on the committee paused at my essay and said, "You mentioned sleeping in your car. How did you keep going?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because it was too complex for a single sentence. I decided that the life I wanted, I said, was worth earning on my own terms, even if no one helped me get there. When I ended the call, I sat back, exhaled, and closed my laptop like it was a chapter I'd just finished writing. But the moment of peace didn't last long. That evening, while passing through the main house's kitchen to return a borrowed casserole dish, I heard Mason and Madison talking in low, sharp tones. "Why is he even still here?" Madison hissed. "Because Dad's got this savior complex now," Mason muttered. "Probably feels guilty for ignoring the charity case all these years." "He's not charity," Madison snapped. "He's leverage. Avery knows it makes him look good." I stood there, invisible just around the corner. Not surprised. Not angry. Just done. Back at the guest house, I finally opened the envelope I'd been avoiding for days. A lease agreement for a low-income student housing unit, pending scholarship approval. All it needed was a signature and my first payment. I had enough saved up, barely. Between tutoring and weekend shifts, I could manage. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't stability. But it would be mine. So I signed it. I placed the copy on my desk and turned back to my bag, already half-packed. The next morning, I woke early again. This time not from anxiety, but from choice. I left a thank you note on the guest house kitchen counter. Not dramatic. Not bitter. Just honest. "Uncle Avery, thank you for the place to stay. It helped more than you'll ever know. I've found housing closer to campus, and I'll be moving out quietly. No need to reach out. Just know I appreciated the roof." Then I zipped my duffel and walked out the door with no one watching. Because freedom doesn't need an audience. The new apartment was smaller than the guest house. A shoebox, really. One bedroom, mismatched tiles in the kitchen, and a ceiling fan that wheezed like it smoked a pack a day. But the lease had my name on it, and that meant something. The move-in went quietly. A friend from class helped haul my 2 duffels and 1 box of books. No drama. No goodbyes. No final text from Mason or Madison, not that I expected one. Uncle Avery sent a brief email 3 days later. "Heard you moved out. Hope you're doing all right. Let me know if you need anything." I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I honestly didn't need anything anymore. Every morning now began with a routine of my choosing. Coffee on my secondhand desk. A run through the park nearby. Study blocks broken by playlists I actually liked, not the background tension of a house where every footstep felt judged. And then it happened. On a random Tuesday, sandwiched between a night shift and an econ midterm, an email arrived. Subject: "Congratulations on your Resilience Scholarship Award. Dear Caleb Sanders, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the 2024 Resilience Award. Your perseverance, work ethic, and academic commitment stood out among hundreds of applicants." I sat still for a moment, rereading that first sentence over and over. Then I laughed, loud, open, unfiltered. There was no need to tell anyone. No need to post about it or rub it in Mason's face. It wasn't for them. It was for me. Proof that I had done more than survive. I had built something from nothing, and no one could take it from me. A few weeks later, Jules, the same classmate who'd helped with the move, invited me to a small birthday dinner. No one asked what car I drove. No one dropped casual digs masked as jokes. We just ate, told stories, and played cards on a lopsided kitchen table. I hadn't laughed like that in years. As the night wound down, Jules offered me a slice of homemade pie and said, "You're different lately, in a good way. Like, lighter. You okay?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out the window at the street lamps flickering over a cracked sidewalk. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I'm more than okay." Later that week, I found the journal I'd started back in the guest house and flipped to the first page. The entries were jagged, half rants, half wounds, but real. I read each one, cover to cover, and when I finished, I wrote one final note at the bottom of the last page. "You did it. You made a life without asking permission." I didn't burn the journal or throw it away. I tucked it into a drawer, not to relive the pain, but to remember the path. Because that's the thing about walking away from people who only saw you as a burden. You begin to see yourself as your own beginning.